Hello and welcome to Beebe Book Buzz, the show where your local librarians tell you what we've been reading recently so that you can find your next great read. I'm Karen Stern and I'm here with Casey Chuico and Jacqueline Powers. I almost said Jacqueline Smith. That is hilarious.
Different.
And we are here to talk about a variety of things today, as usual. I'm going to start first. I'm going to talk about, if you're a fan of fiction, which I know we all are, if you're a fan of fiction, you'll know that there's a whole lot of retellings out there recently. I'm thinking in particular of a lot of like old stories, fairy tales, myths. Think Madeline Miller and Circe and Song of Achilles that she wrote, and Natalie Haynes, who's written a bunch of them. A lot of these, these are from the points of view of women. They take the women in the old Greek myths and they retell the stories from their points of view. So it gives you a whole different perspective on something we thought we knew well. Last year we had Demon Copperhead, which was a retelling of Dickens' David Copperfield, and that was by Barbara Kingsolver. Huge hit that everyone read.
It was so good.
Oh, you did read it?
I did read it.
Oh, okay.
I did not. I made my husband read it too.
Oh, good. All right. And this year, I think the new smash hit in terms of retellings is this book, James by Percival Everett. Now, you might know the name Percival Everett. He's been around for a while and he's written some really amazing stuff, but he's become extra famous because his book Erasure was what was turned into the movie American Fiction, which just was nominated for the Oscars. Okay, so everyone says read that one too. There's a book called Trees, so he's definitely the man of the hour at the moment. And so this is his brand new one, and this one is a retelling of Huckleberry Finn, but it's from the point of view of Jim, who is the enslaved person, of course, who Huck has his adventures down the river. And so the basic premise of the story is still the same. You know, Huck fakes his own death, if you remember, and Jim hears that he's going to be sold away from his wife and daughter, and he's terrified of that happening, so he runs in order to try to figure out like how to stop that from happening. And he and Huck find themselves together on that island across from the town where they come from, and then they end up floating down the river on the raft, and all kinds of things happen. So the same thing happens here, but again, this is all from the point of view of Jim, who increasingly through the story, even though he's called Jim by everybody and he calls himself Jim to everybody, thinks of himself as James, as he strives towards freedom, as he's a sense of kind of his own identity. There's a kind of a dramatic moment at the end when he kind of renames himself James, and this is not giving too much away because believe me, this book has got lots going on in it. But that is the kind of arc of his. But along the way, there's all the adventures, all the stuff that happens in Huckleberry Finn, or not all of it. Some of it's the same and some of it's different. So, but you get the characters that you remember: Pat Finn, who's Huckleberry's like no good dad, and the Duke and the Dauphin, who are the con men in the story, if you remember any of those. Miss Watson. There's a warring family thing going on, kind of the Grangerfords and the Shepherdsons. They were also in the book. There's a very dramatic scene with Judge Thatcher. And so they all have they have slightly different roles maybe in the book. They have slightly different cons to con or stories to tell, but essentially they're there for the same reasons as Twain's. But there are also new characters because, of course, when Huck and Finn get separated, as they do at different times in the story, of course, we're with Jim this time instead of with Huck. So we meet the people that Jim meets along the way. For instance, Norman, a black man who's passing as white, who can pass as white, so he has also been enslaved. He's singing in a minstrel show in blackface. So think of all the layers right there, the dualities and the ironies of a black man passing as white, singing in a minstrel show. There's Sammy, a young enslaved woman who passes as a man, and Jim helps her to escape from the man who enslaves her, who has been raping her since she was a child. So there's lots of people that duality that you see with those two characters is something that marks the whole book. Because most of all, this is about James. Because he's an enslaved black man in America, is forced to lead this double existence, and that's what we live in as we live in the book, as we're going through all these adventures. On the outside, he speaks like an enslaved person. He has the vernacular, and he and all the other black characters in the book, they are constantly dumbing themselves down in front of white people because there is nothing more threatening to the white people around them than a smart black person. But inside, James is very, very well read, very well spoken, so what you're hearing is the whole narration is actual James, and then the only time you hear him speaking in the kind of vernacular is when he's in dialogue.
He's kind of playing the part,
and only with white people, right? Not with. So you're through the entire book, you're living his duality. You're feeling it, and that I think is one of the geniuses of this book. It's such an accessible read. It's not hard to get through at all. I mean, everybody I know who's read this book has read it in like 1 or 2 days. It's a great story, and just page turner and all that. But at the same time, it's got these layers that you're just living in the whole time, and that's what I think is really the genius of the book. Anyway, so he's read a lot of the books in Judge Thatcher's library on the sly, and he's taught all of the people around him to read and write. He can read and write, and most of his family can, and his friends as well. But of course, he has to continually hide these parts of himself, and he has to hide them with Huck, even who he's spending a lot of the book with, right? Huck, who he kind of can't help himself from loving in a sort of father-son way. And their relationship is another arc in the book, which is really interesting and has quite a few twists and turns, which are really good. And again, as he's very good at showing the everyday danger of being enslaved in America at that time. Everything that goes wrong is a possible threat, and you feel it. Something gets stolen and a black person is around, who's going to get blamed? And getting blamed means probably getting flogged or possibly getting lynched or whatever it is. If someone's dead near you, you don't need to be there. You need to be out of the picture. You just have that constant sense through the whole book of peril and this inability, this complete lack of freedom. Everyone knows that a slave is not free, but the complete every minute of an
ongoing stress.
It's just the constant thing, and he makes you feel that in this book in a way that I think some other books I've read, yes, but this one is I really was impressed with how well he did that. It's also funny, believe it or not. I mean, it's a dark humor because of all of the layers of irony that we're talking about, but it will make you laugh out loud at times. And he's very observant, and he's quick with his wit and all that stuff. So that's great. So read this book for the adventures, and there's a very dramatic ending, so you won't be disappointed if you want that. The hilarious characters. I mean, the people like the Duke and the Dauphin, they're like caricatures of themselves. They're ridiculous, and they're supposed to be, right? They're kind of farce, and that sense of humor. But as I said, stay with it because it really just lets you into his head and gives you this picture of what it meant to be enslaved. And as a consequence, I think it helps you understand even more a lot of what it means to be black still today in this country. Fantastic book.
I really love this. The first book I read that had this kind of a retelling was Wicked.
Right.
Yeah. And I remember thinking that was so interesting. Like, wow, like you changed that perspective and it's a whole different story.
Right.
Yeah.
Like it's a completely different story.
And you're learning you're learning a new perspective on humanity, and that's what all of these things do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what fiction. I mean, fiction in
That's
itself
what fiction
is,
does.
is
Right.
empathy building.
I mean, we had this great discussion about Hernan Diaz's book Trust at our last book club, and he ends with this quote, or I ended with the quote, but of his that was, I'll get it. I'm not going to try to actually quote it, but basically the idea is we have lived with this idea that history is where we go for the facts and what to learn about humans and to know what happened, and we are now in this day and age learning that probably fiction has way more truth in it than the actual history books do, because I mean, when you read this and you think about this and you think about the events that happened with this new picture, it makes you think, well, what do the history books tell us?
Exactly, because history is a certain amount fictionalized. Like, there's certain things we can track through primary sources, but who's telling that? Who's telling the history? Who's writing that textbook?
Right?
Yeah, I mean, Hamilton's
who dies, who tells your story?
and Hamilton's a double example, because not only is that kind of the thing, but also it's telling a story that that was all white people at the time through the lens of people of color. So it's like got the double, like not only is it telling the story with like a story from history that tells that story, but then the way that it's actually visually, it hits it too.
You can't even, I mean, a lot of history, like if someone's just like, we're going to talk about the transatlantic slave trade, like so many people were taken from Africa and brought to here. Like, what does that even mean? Like without the people's stories, like what does that even mean? It's just like statistics and it's
fact.
It's economics.
And then where
that doesn't teach you anything.
No.
And it's and even the facts, it's like who was in power to give you those facts,
Right.
Who's telling you the facts? Who are you learning the facts with? Like who is around you when you're learning these things? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of good stuff like that going on right now. It's exciting to read fiction right now. Anyway, moving on, Casey.
I'm gonna switch gears, but in some ways not quite as drastically, because I'll say Jackie's read one of the books in the series. So, our copy's not in. We have like 6 copies of this book. It is not in. I'm actually, if you've watched me do Book Buzz before, I don't usually actually talk kids books, but I am going to talk a kids book series today. So the first one in the series is, which as I said, we do not have in right now, is The One and Only Ivan by Catherine Applegate. There are currently 2 others in the series, which are the ones I just read. I read The One and Only Ivan quite a few years ago, like when it first came out. And then there's The One and Only Bob, which is book 2, and The One and Only Ruby, which is book 3. And then there's a new book coming out, I believe in May, that's the final in the series. That's The One and Only Family.
It just came up in an email like
but
that.
So The One and Only Ivan is based on a true story of a gorilla who was brought over from Africa, and through a variety of terrible choices and the like greater terrible choices of circuses and stuff, ends up as a mall attraction in the middle of like nowhere off a highway. In Florida.
Easy.
And it was long enough ago that there was like no oversight, no thought. It was just like, sure, let's put a gorilla in a cage in a mall. And so even though it's based on the true story, and she's written a picture book that's very much like the exact story, she obviously fictionalizes this series. The first one is from the point of view of Ivan while they're in the mall. And it's the story of him, Bob, who is a stray dog that has found holes in the cages and get into a bunch of the cages.
Yeah.
An older elephant named Stella, and then Ruby, who shows up towards the beginning, who's a baby elephant, young elephant. And basically it's the story of them at the mall and then eventually managing to escape the mall and end up at a accredited zoo in Florida. And it's, so Catherine Applegate's been writing a really long time. She used to write as K.A. Applegate when like I was little and wrote like the Animorph series and like a whole bunch of, like she's written a variety of stuff. She's not afraid to make a statement in her writing, but does it in a way that's like perfect for kids. But I'm book talking it here because they're also really good books for adults. Like you can sit down and read one in an hour. They're very short, but they hit, we're talking animals here instead of people, but it's like, it talks a lot about the ethics of these kind of things, because her animals are, animals certainly have a certain amount of sentience and understand a certain amount of what they're, but like her animals obviously have human level intelligence, like know what's going on, can really see what's happening, but are powerless to stop it. Like there's nothing they can really do without the help of humans.
Right.
And so like you will giggle. I mean, she does a really good job with voice. Each of these books are very different, but like perfectly from the voice of the characters. She set them up in the first book. And, so she's amazing at voice. And she's also really good at balancing for kids, but also for adults, that element of the very serious and things that are, more just like, so for example, in the one and only Bob, at this point, he's living with the family that rescued them from the zoo, or from the mall. And, but he's like, I'm not a house dog. Like, I'm not a pet. He's like, because, I've lived on the streets and I've done the thing. And so this whole book is kind of him coming to terms while a hurricane hits Florida with the fact that being a pet and like enjoying his family and accepting that doesn't make him any less like who he is, which is like a pretty deep topic for a children's book that like not a lot of print on a page. No. But, and he's dealing with the trauma of like, ending up a puppy on the streets as a very young, very, very young puppy. Right. And what he had to do to survive and like what might have happened to his family.
Like he has like PTSD.
Yeah.
Like it's very well done.
And he's still really good friends with Ruby and Ivan, and goes and visits them at the zoo. But yeah, it really gets into, and then the one and only Ruby, she really leans into the idea, like that concept that elephants remember everything, which is pretty true. Like elephants apparently do in fact have fantastic memories. And so this one, which is you can see it's quite a bit shorter, but this one is mostly the story of Ruby dealing with her own PTSD of being stolen from Africa and being brought to the United States and then being bounced around basically zoos and circuses and malls until she's rescued with the others. Right. Because she's gotten big enough that she's starting to get tusks and she's freaking out about it. And you find out that she has a really good reason for freaking out about tusks, because if you know anything about the African animal, like the yes. threats to elephants, right. A lot of it is the hunting for tusks. And so it's like, but at the same time, they're still really cute stories, partially because of the way she does the voice, I think, has a big part to do it. But like, I would say Jackie read this one with her kids, and like, kids weren't traumatized, like, no, because
they weren't. Her writing style is very matter of fact. It's like, I'm reading it and going, Jesus, this is grim. And my kids are just like, huh. Like, it's very, well, it's not overly embellished. It's just like kind of the facts. Yeah. And then, I don't know. I think really well done. I think she's really really figured out a way to like write to kids in a way that doesn't give them PTSD, but like, I suspect kids who read these stories are going to be looking at like zoos and circuses with a really critical eye. Like they're really going to look and make sure, like, because they talk a lot about the zoo in these two books and like how the zoo is good but still not perfect. But, most of the animals in here are captive, have always been in the United States or have been in for most of their life. And so they couldn't survive in the wild anymore. And so there's a lot of like kind of conversations and commentary about how like, obviously don't steal animals from other places, but, it's better than the mall.
It's better than the mall or most circuses, talks a lot about a lot of the circuses and stuff.
And it also it sounds like it's developing empathy for someone else's story.
Yes.
Again, I mean, and that is also the beauty of fiction, coming back to what, we're
exactly.
gonna make this show about the beauty of fiction.
We are. Where we're going.
The thing we have in common between all the books without meaning to. We did not plan this.
Yes, but the empathy that you then develop for these characters by looking at them and thinking, oh, what's their story? What's your story? How are you affected? Yeah. That's just the power of it all.
Yeah, because I mean, in each one of the books, in Ivan, it's very focused. Like you see some with the other, I mean, Ruby's right on the cover, part of their deciding they have to get out is because they're like, we're not going to let Ruby deal with what we've been dealing with for years as the little elephant. But I mean, it really is like each one of them is the individual stories while building the stories of the characters from the previous, like, you learn more about. And apparently the one and only family, I think there's a little bit of a time jump between each, but I think there's going to be a more significant time jump because the idea, we go back to Ivan's point of view from what I've read, and he now has little gorilla babies.
Oh, okay.
And so it's him tackling the idea of, I never expected to have a family, never even expected to like be outside the mall. Like kind of how do parent?
Yeah.
And I think I think we're going to get more of his history. This one didn't really get it. The first one did not really get into his history pre-mall. I think we're going to get more into his, because he also came from Africa. So I think we're going to get more of his story, having come, rudely being, and illegally being stolen from his family and brought to the States. So. So yeah, I mean, if you're looking for something, like it's not a light read, especially because I think adults do get hit a little bit more in the gut with them, but they are quick reads. And so it's one of those things, like if you haven't read something in a while, or you're just looking for something a little different, like I'm like, you can read these, most adults can probably read these in like an hour.
We
like
read them aloud to our kids, and it probably took like a week or two. Like just reading for like a little bit every night.
There is illustrations. I'm not probably gonna be able to find one now, so I'm not gonna like waste time flipping through. But I mean, they're pretty quick reads. A little bit of action, a little bit of introspection, but in a way, they might be a palate cleanser just in that they're a quicker, faster read for an adult. Or if you have kids at home, suggest, starting about the kindergarten age,
right,
as a read aloud. So
perfect. All right, moving swiftly along.
So mine has a pig on the cover. Does that count?
There we go.
It's a segue, right?
It's a segue, right? So I read Kylie Reid's Come and Get It. Her first novel, Such a Fun Age, came out in 2019 and was a thing. It was a big deal at the time.
Big deal. Yeah.
And I was really looking forward to this one. I think I even might have talked about her other one here. I could have. I don't remember. I feel like
I think you did.
So just like Such a Fun Age, what she does well is character. And this book is all character. She does place pretty well, I think. So this is mostly set in Arkansas in 2017. There's times where you jump to Chicago and like Washington State for a little while, but it's mostly in Arkansas at the University of Arkansas in some campus. And she does that well. Like I was like, okay, Arkansas sounds pretty. The two primary characters, Agatha, are Agatha and Millie. Agatha is a 38-year-old gay white woman, and she's a visiting professor at this college. She's coming from Chicago. Millie is a 24-year-old black RA who has just returned to school after having taken a year off to care for her mother who had eye problems. So there's all these people around them, right? So Robin is Agatha's kind of estranged partner. They've got a weird thing going on. There's all these college girls that live in Millie's dorm. 3 of them are close friends. The other 2 are kind of outsiders, but sort of they're roommates with one of them, so they kind of get sucked in. And so the way it starts is that Agatha is interviewing these 3 friends, these 3 girls, about a book she's researching on weddings. She had previously written another book about, it was something about rituals. So this is like the ritual of weddings. And so she's doing this research. And she's got this inner monologue about the girls. Like she's classifying them as she's like, she's meeting them. So combined with what I call, this Tana French does this well, I call it the written accent.
Yes.
It's like a way that people write that you can hear the accent.
Right.
And so she also does that exceptionally well.
Right.
So you could hear everybody. You could really, they were really fleshed out really well. And she just makes all these kind of secondary characters really come to life very quickly. So she's doing this interview. Millie had sort of somehow, she had set it up because she was the RA and that she was the kind of fixer in that scenario. But Millie finds out at some point that she can hear through the walls from her room to the suite where 3 of, not the 3 original friends, but like 3 girls live, the 5 that are the main characters. She says something to Agatha. Agatha says, well, do you think I could come listen? And so she essentially pays Millie to listen in on these girls' conversations. So it makes Millie sound not great, but she is. So Millie is desperately saving, all she wants in the world is to buy her own house. And she finds this house. It's this little tiny cute cottage. It costs like $100,000, which is bananas here, but okay.
Adorable.
But it's still more money than she has. She's in college. So she doesn't feel like she can turn the money down. These girls are kind of casually racist, so she's like, going to look the other way. So they start this kind of relationship where Agatha's coming over and like they're hanging out while she listens to the conversations like every week. So then it gets more complicated because now Millie and Agatha start having like a thing, and they're like, "This is a bad idea. It's a bad idea." They both know
like a bad idea. I mean,
they both know it's
100%
a bad
idea.
Yeah, everyone.
Nothing about this
everyone
is a good idea.
on the same page. So obviously, and I don't want to give away plot points here, but like the eavesdropping leads nowhere good for anyone, and culminates in this like fairly dramatic climax that like upends everybody's relationships and situations, and it's like a whole thing. And Reed did this really well in her other book too. There was a kind of, it's sort of a slow burn, and then all of a sudden it's like it blows up. So, but what Reed does really, really, really well is, and she again in the other book as well, they're social commentaries. It's about classes. I mean, racism. It's this kind of emotional exploration of power dynamics, but it's done in such an approachable, readable, not dark, or it's not nobody's preachy. It's very real. It's very realistic. You hear the book from 3 characters' perspectives, Millie and Agatha, and another character who I won't get into her. She's a side jag, but she ends up being fairly pivotal. Kennedy, and their perspectives and their points of view, the way that they're seeing these situations that are, it's different depending on who you're talking to, how they're viewing the situation. Yeah. It's just, she's really, really good at that. And there's such insight there, and there's such depth to all these people, even if they're just like these 19-year-old college girls who are college girls.
Yep.
Their whole worldview is so familiar, like, and I'm 20 years from having graduated from college, but I'm still like, oh yeah, you're gonna cringe thinking about this later. Like you're like, but so aside from Millie and Agatha, Millie and 2 of her close friends, they're excellent sidekicks. I found every other character in this book distasteful. Actually, I'm sorry, aside from Millie and her sidekicks, Agatha, I deplored. But her girlfriend, Robin, I found their relationship extremely compelling and very relatable, but I could not stand either of them. Right. You don't have to. Like, it doesn't matter.
No, Millie, it kind of makes it better, really, I think.
It makes it better. Millie is extremely likable, but then does all these things that you're like, ooh, poor decision, Millie. But
bad life choices.
Bad life choices, but like, you're still always rooting for her.
Oh, of course. Yeah. It's kind of like reality TV, right? I mean, a little
it
bit.
has a like. It's not sensational in any way, but it's like, it's that. It's because all these like 19-year-old girls are just making everything like a thing.
Yeah,
right. Just
drama.
It's like everything is a drama, and everything's a thing, and everything is life or death, and everything.
Right.
There's a whole scene about a prank that they play, and then like everyone's all upset about it. And when you read this as an adult, you're just like, it's fine, children.
It'll
like,
be okay.
No one cares. It's like, this is not a thing you're gonna.
But those things mean a lot.
They do, and you feel that here, like how, and how Millie takes her RA duties like really, really seriously, and her friends are just like, you're taking this too seriously, like lighten up. And the kind of irony is that she is the one who took it seriously, yet ends up in this situation where she's like sleeping with a professor. It's not her professor, but like, it's not okay.
Yeah.
But it's just so well done and was so readable. I read it really, really quickly. Like, it's not that the plot is. There's not a plot.
Right.
Exactly.
It's not like there's an arc that ends in some great.
No.
It's the character decisions versus the like.
It's a. I mean, it's a snapshot essentially.
Yes.
It's a snapshot of that life. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would recommend this to people who like a slow burn character novel. That is very much what this is. If you liked J. Courtney Sullivan's Friends and Strangers, tremendous read. Like same idea, power dynamics. Gabrielle Zevin's Young Jane Young.
Yep.
Same idea.
Okay. Oh, that's a good one. I just had somebody asking about Gabrielle Zevin read-alikes the other day. So
I would go with this one.
Okay.
So that was Come and Get It, Kylie Reed.
Awesome.
Yes, okay. Right.
Come and get it. All right, well, we hope you enjoyed, and we hope that you pick up some of the books we talked about today, and we will see you next time on Beebe Book Buzz. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.